So, welcome back, everybody. Today is the second time in my life that I talked to an actual author, and I'm really happy to have JCM Berne, whose newest sci-fi superhero book, Wistful Ascending, I just finished, and I figured we'll just have a bit of a chat. So, yeah, Joe, tell us all about you and give us the pitch. What are you doing?
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Joe Berne. I write under JCM because I'm sorry, Mr. Abercrombie, but Joe is not an inspiring author's name. Mr. Abercrombie, Ann Hill, and probably others, but I always thought, the connotations are always a little, Joe the plumber is what we say in just necessarily the person you want writing your fantasy novel, I guess. I don't know. Maybe
to be fair, Abercrombie goes under Lord Grimdark on Twitter, so yeah. He seems to have figured that one out as well.
And the Abercrombie fancies it up, in a way that my a single syllable last name just doesn't really work. But anyway, you'll find my books on Amazon under JCM Berne. I have my third book just came out on Kindle, paperback, and KU, Blood Reunion. Very excited about that. It's been an interesting week, and I am a lifelong geek. I've been reading comics and fantasy novels and so on for 40 years. So I spent my youth, taking the subway to the Forbidden Planet in Manhattan and, finding my books by reading the back of every book on the shelf, which was basically everything printed in the US and in England, and just reading whatever caught my fancy, which was usually, every things from John Carter to Michael Moorcock, that sort of stuff. So, and I've been, heavy into comic books for a long time. And at one point I said, I should do this, or I should try. Maybe not I should do this, but I've written several novels, but, when I was younger, didn't really get an agent or anything. And then at some point I realized, I can do, I can publish these myself. So I sat down and I said, all right, I have like many people who are my age who like to write, I have many chapter ones in my trunk, they just never went anywhere. And I said, if I want to finish something, let me finish something. But I promised myself, if I write this book, I'm going to publish it, even if it sucks. I literally, I should have written that and put a post-it, right? Even if it sucks. So I wrote the book and put it out and got a surprisingly positive response. Surprising, I guess, to me.
Mm-hmm. Which one was that?
Huh?
Which one was that first novel?
Wistful Ascending. Wistful Ascending. I published it in 2020. It's not new. And then what happened is people liked it quite a bit. And I said, well, if I'm going to write, I should kind of figure out what I'm doing, because I had no idea. There was no craft at all. I had never taken a writing class. I had never read a book on structure. I had no idea. And then so I started, listening to lectures and reading books on craft, and I had hired an editor who said, you got to get rid of a bunch of these sections because they're terrible. So I did, rewrote it, re-released it, and then I took off from there.
That's very cool. I know you can't drink right now, but I will definitely have to. It's the afternoon, and cheers to all of that, man.
Cheers. I'm drinking tequila and spirit. But I told Raf before, I have a long drive later tonight, and if I have a couple glasses of tequila right now, it's not going to be.
No, we don't support drinking and driving on this channel.
I wouldn't, of course not.
So you started out with Wistful Ascending, and you just started it, and I want to talk about that a little more, about your process and all of that. Sure. But first, how hard was it to actually finish that first novel for the first time?
You mean from a perspective of actually writing the words?
Yeah. Because I know exactly how you feel, starting stuff, having chapter ones and having introductions and prologues and stuff is something that I have more in the academic field, but I've been there. So how hard was it for you to actually finish the whole thing?
Yeah, I was highly motivated, and I had a really good idea of how I wanted it to end. And if you have the beginning and the ending, the middle is easier to figure out.
So you went from the ending and then had a goal to run to, so to speak.
I wrote it in order. I didn't write the last chapter first, but I knew what I wanted to accomplish in there. I knew, I got very lucky in a lot of the choices I made. I chose having a lot of smaller plots kind of weaving together. And that worked really well for me because it helped me fill out the middle without struggling. Whereas usually I just write a first chapter and then I want to finish it. I get to, the middle is always usually what authors consider like the hard part.
Yeah.
Usually you know how to write an ending, you know how you want to start. It's getting in between. Like you have, all right, I've got 10,000 words at the beginning, 10,000 at the end. What's the 100,000 between those two? That's the hard part. But by having, and honestly, a lot of it was luck. A lot of it is good decisions I made purely by accident.
Well, I'm not sure if it's accident, right? I mean, you said you read books and comic books for 40 years, and some of that stuff rubs off whether you want to or not.
Yeah. I mean, I write. I can tell you my whole authorial perspective. I write as a curmudgeon. I'm the kind of person who I'll read things and I love this. There's this cool thing going on in here, but this part just annoys me. Why does he have to do that? Why, or she? Why is this element in there? It's so frustrating. And so I had many ideas of what not to do, because it's all the things that frustrate me. And then I thought, well, let me try to throw in, it's such a stupid way to describe the creative process. I'm just going to throw in all the things I like and not do the things I don't like, and I'll have a book. But that's kind of how it worked. And there's a lot of things I don't like because I'm a very difficult person. So, all these things annoy me. So I had plenty of things to avoid, so, and then it worked out. It worked out.
And the ideas or like the setting and stuff, how long did you have that in your brain before you actually sat down and started writing? Or did that come first, or did the scene and the plot come first for you?
The character of Rohan, he's very much so, I'm always a fan of the sort of retired gunslinger trope. Yeah. Right? It's just a fun trope. I'm not a YA guy. I'm an older dude. I'm more going to empathize with the guy closer to retirement than the teenager just discovering himself for the first time, which is, those things are fine. That's just not my interest as much. Yeah. So I had the retired gunslinger idea. And then I read this comic book called Invincible, which is by Robert Kirkman, who everyone knows because he did The Walking Dead. Yeah. I mean, everyone knows The Walking Dead, I think. But Invincible is a great comic. What it was a comic book about a superhero, but it was definitely written for grown-ups. Right? It wasn't super silly or super comedic. Yeah. But it was written to sell as a celebration of superheroes. Because it wasn't everyone's terrible and the superheroes are all dysfunctional and they all have horrible families, and let's admire, because most superhero comics for adults, that's the kind of tone they take.
You're the heroes and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're anti-heroes, they're killing everybody. Like, oh no, heroes who want to do the right thing, that's for kids. And I was like, well, Invincible was a hero who wanted to do the right thing, and he made mistakes and screwed up, but he was written for grown-ups. Yeah. And I was like, I loved it so much. So when I was done, there was a plot element in Invincible that bugged me. I'm very I hate when there's you have this stable like situation like between countries or something in this book, and it's been stable for 100 years, but it shouldn't have been. Someone discovers, oh, if we train these guys to use bows, we can defeat everybody and conquer the world. How come no one thought of that for the last 1,000 or 10,000 or 50,000 years? You can answer those questions, but if you don't, it bugs me a lot. And there was one of those in Invincible. And that was the keystone to the whole hybrid thing. The fact that they, the whole the Ildrach and the fact that they are not that powerful, but their kids are, but their kids are sterile. So you've got this sort of balance of power that kind of almost makes sense in a long-term scale. And then I took off from there. I took off from there. And then the magic system is something I've been, the sort of power system I've been tinkering with for probably 30 or 40 years. Because I was challenged in high school by a friend who disliked fantasy, and he's like, magic doesn't really make sense. Like, why isn't it industrialized? If wizards are so powerful, why aren't there big schools full of them? And or why aren't there machines powered by magic? And he used all the things that annoyed him. Yeah, so where I'm getting it from. My friends are also easily annoyed. Yeah. So the magic system is largely a way to sort of avoid those kind of, or have answers to those sorts of questions. Because it matters to me. I don't know that I even answer them all in the book, but there are answers, like in my head.
And I think that's exactly what matters. That there's always that discussion about like hard and soft magic systems out there, and people have their preferences. And I think like even something like Lord of the Rings, there is a magic system behind it. The magic system boils down to, there's something like conservation of energy. There's like, if you put a lot of energy into your magic, it'll drain your spirit or whatever. And
Right.
and that's enough to make magic work, because it suddenly is not, you can't do miracles because you have to pay for them at some point. And
Yeah,
I think
exactly. Yeah. And that's super important. I mean, I'm a big fan of the hard magic system. I don't feel that someone needs to actually lay out all the rules in the text. No, but you get a sense, and we've talked about this with Glenn Cook.
Yeah.
Glenn Cook and then Black Company series. We've talked about this elsewhere.
Yeah.
He doesn't really lay out what wizards can do, but he does so much to give you a sense that there is a structure to it, that there is a price to be paid, that there are limitations. Even just the fact that, in that series, they will ask a wizard, hey, can this other guy, can he do this? Do we have to worry about him doing X, Y, or Z? And he'll say, he can probably do X, but probably not Y, and he could do Z, but he'd be tired for a week or something like that. So there's a system. I don't even know if Glenn Cook knows exactly what they can all do. I don't know if he's ever figured it out, but he makes it seem as if there isn't. It makes for better stories.
I think that's
kind of story.
I think that's part of that really, is like whether you want, and those are different stories to tell, right? Whether you want a feeling that there are rules, or if you lay out all the rules and put them on the table, like say someone like Brandon Sanderson does, what you end up with there is you make the magic and figuring out what to do by magic. You make that a key feature of your novel. When you read something like, say, Mistborn, it's basically a heist, and a lot of heist stories are, about the reader figuring out. You lay out all the tools, and your hero is going to succeed, and you as the reader, just like in a crime novel and like a whodunit, where you want to figure out who done it before like the character on the page, it's like the same. You build the heist in your brain as the reader, and for that you need to have the rules laid out. But if that's not the point of your story, to have that puzzle for the reader, which is like, can they do this by magic, and if so, how? If that's not then all you need is the fact that magic comes at a cost.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a certain kind of story where I have a theory of endings. You want your heroes, your protagonists to win. If you're writing, well, I mean, it depends on the kind of story you're writing, but if you do, you want them to. It's a virtue thing, right? You want them to win because they were not just because they got lucky. You can write a story where the heroes win because they just got lucky, or because God came down and handed them a victory. That's okay, but there's a different kind of satisfaction you get when your heroes win because of their virtuous characteristics, like being clever. Always better to have a hero figure out a clever, or just if they're just stronger. I mean, I'm thinking of some Star Wars movie, the ninth one, where there's just main character wins just because they have. It's like the least satisfying story is going to be finale is going to be a tug of war.
Yeah.
Like the bigger, heavier, stronger person wins. Like, well, great. So your hero happened to be bigger and heavier than the other person, but how does, mystically heavier? But so what? Like it's not satisfying the way is. Oh, but they had virtues. They were clever. They had things about them we like.
I think it kind of comes down to that idea of like a more like Aristotelian worldview, so to speak, right? When you have your characters have like that one thing they're good at, that defining characteristic that kind of is also a bit of a goal, right? It's like if they can fulfill their telos, that makes for satisfaction, because that's that's how they define themselves, and that's what they're for.
Yeah. So the big challenge to writing these books is I have this main character who's I jokingly say he's very good at punching things. People haven't read it. He's got, he can fly, he can punch holes in things. He's, all but indestructible. He's
very Superman-like.
He's very Superman. Take away the laser eyes and the freezing breath, and he's very Superman-like. But I put him in a situation where, if he's just punching all of his, difficulties away, it becomes a very boring book. Very quickly. And you can introduce someone who's even better at punching the bigger Superman as his nemesis, and that people make comic books like that. But it gets a little stale, at some point, in my opinion, or at least it's not the kind of thing I wanted to write. So I was trying to give him problems to solve that he can't just punch, which is why there's a romantic subplot, because you can't. I mean, unless it's consensual, you can't punch your way through a romance. I won't do non-consensual sex in my. you know, you were talking about grimdark and how you know, I'm nothing against grimdark. Happy to, you know, I'll read some of it and happy to have people write it. But I mean, I really wanted to go the other way in tone.
Yeah.
You know, I really wanted something light. You know, there's not going to be a rape scene in my books. Like I can tell you right now, right? You
Yeah.
know, the heroes are going to generally win. They're never going to be at too much risk. It's going to be, you know, that's just the tone I wanted. I kind of feel like the last 5 years, if I want grim dark, I can turn on CNN.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, so I try to have my books are going to be an antidote. You should basically reading my books. You should feel pretty good most of the time.
Yeah.
Or that's the goal, you know. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you accomplished that. And I want to come back to that in a moment. But you still don't hold back, like, you know, when it comes to darker elements. I mean, with Wistful Ascending, there's one key scene where we definitely have more darker elements and the character having to face like their darker side. Those things are in there, but yeah, I agree. And I personally appreciated and I know that may come as a surprise, but I did appreciate the romantic subplot and the way it developed, because yeah, it felt very mature in a way, you know. It felt mature, the whole thing, the interaction of Rohan with both with the mother and the kid. That stuff felt very yeah, I guess authentic is the word here. It felt real in a way that a lot of romance, especially in fantasy or science fiction, I'm not an expert on superheroes, but it felt real in a way. And I think part of that is that those characters, well, they're grown-ups. They're not, as you said, like young heroes breaking out. They have lived lives before. They feel experienced at being at being people, I guess.
Well, you know, I'm in my I got divorced in my early 40s, so I have experience dating. You know, I'm remarried now. My lovely wife is not here, but I mean, she's not in the house. But I'm sorry. I mean, it sounded like she passed away. And nope, not what I meant. But I wanted to portray like how grown-ups date, which you don't like. You do see it, but so much of it, you know, people have to throw in the you know, the miscommunication trope where they get together, but then someone says something, the other person misunderstands, and they have this huge fight. I'm just tired of all that.
Yeah,
you know, I couldn't do it. So I wanted to write, you know, like how do grown-ups date, and you know, when I know single moms, you know, they've got a kid, they got a job, they have, you know, it's like, I like you, let's just go out. I don't have time for games and messing around because literally don't have time. I don't have hours left in my day. So if you want to do this, so I was very proud of that romantic subplot. And when reviewers point it out, I get very happy. I'm like, it's not a ton of a percentage of the text in terms of word count, but you know.
Yeah, and I think that's another part. It's like how Rohan and Tamerlan, yeah, how they try to fit the romance into their lives, because they have lives. They have, you know, they can't just sit down and, you know, basically once they get off school, they think about romance and love until they have to go to school next day. So they can't do that. And I think it felt real in a way that I really appreciated there.
A lot of readers call it a slice of life novel, which is not how I would describe it first. But I appreciate that people enjoy, you know, like enjoy that aspect of it. Like, you know, because honestly, half of that was just me having action beats. You know, it's like I have this huge fight, and then what is he going to do? Well, you know, he's going to go on a date because I got to do something to like put space between that huge fight and the next huge fight or the next action scene that I have. I can't just slap him back to back. So let's back off and have him, you know, have dinner with somebody or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of dinner and a lot of like very specific food scenes in there, which, you know, I didn't like that.
I like food.
Yeah, that certainly comes across, and I think I did appreciate that. There's a lot of things that I still want to come back to, but let's talk about the positive aspect of it and the superhero thing. Now, you already said you're like very much into comic books. You grew up with comic books, and there's a lot of like cynicism and darkness in contemporary grown-up comic books. We're still in the like subverting the tropes of the superhero comic, but you know, the superhero comics started out for reasons, and they those heroes fulfill, specific roles. And I don't know if you've read The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon at some point.
I have not. I've heard of it. I have not read it.
I'm pretty sure you might actually really enjoy that. But
Okay, I'll pick it up.
it's a historical novel about a Jewish immigrant from Czech Republic and an American, a New Yorker Jew, both like being in their late teens, starting their own comic books in like the late 30s. So it deals in with that whole idea of superheroes fulfilling a very specific need in a very specific time, almost having almost an emancipatory kind of role in that time, which kind of feeds in like how they are very upbeat in a lot of ways at the time, because they are fighting fights that people that felt powerless at the time couldn't fight, or in a way. And I think it's important to keep that aspect alive, because that means a lot to people who can't actually go and fight those fights. And it doesn't matter which kind of people they are. They happen to be mostly Jewish people in like the 30s for obvious reasons, but that need is still there, right?
I mean, I feel like, I don't want to compare any of my hardships. I have the fewest hardships of any demographic on the planet. I'm a white guy living in the U.S. My hardships are nothing compared to almost anyone else.
Yeah.
But we still live in a society where unless you're in the very, very select few, I feel most of us are trained to be powerless. I don't really feel like I have impacts in my life on much beyond my very most immediate circle of friends. It's like, if I'm walking down the street and I see someone getting mugged, that doesn't really happen, but this metaphor, someone getting mugged in an alley, right? This thing, witnessing a crime, right? My chance of doing much beyond calling the police and like walking away, that's all I'm going to do. I see some horrific things being done by my government, or other governments, policies being passed, and there's not much I can contribute money to some campaign, but really, I do feel very powerless in my everyday life. And the beauty of having, you write about Superman can fly out and like just take down all the nukes, right? Which was a story that was told, I think it was Superman, I'm not even sure, but that idea, if I'm going to fantasize about something and write a fantasy story, let me write a fantasy story about someone who can actually affect change.
And I think that's a very powerful thing. And you compare that to, there's that idea that a lot of fantasy, possibly science fiction as well, a lot of comic books are about power fantasies. But there's a difference between like a personal power fantasy, when you read about like, dudes getting their way, which is a lot of fantasy, or, that power fantasy being very much about affecting positive change on like a larger scale. And I think that's very much like something that comic books, in a way, when they are unapologetically positive, the heroes, they fulfill a very specific need. And while it obviously makes sense to go and subvert those tropes for those people who want that, I feel there's also always demand to have that without the cynicism, because world is a dark place out there.
That's what I tried to do. I tried to hit all the superhero tropes. I've got the guy, and he literally wears a costume. And he's got superpowers, and he's part of a small group of people with those powers. And there's an explanation for why they're not all, why everyone doesn't have them. And there's different kinds of powers. You see more of that in there's more of it popping up in later books. There's like someone who's a wizard with an actual wizard. So different sources. That's the other thing that happens in comic books. You have all kinds of. This guy had a nuclear accident. Now he's very strong, which is weird, but whatever. This guy learned sorcery, and he's become Doctor Strange. This guy has powered armor. So you got to throw all these diverse things in there. It's not just So I tried to hit those tropes, but not, but also have a main character who's for them. Look, there's a lot of I studied ethics, at the graduate level. I was a philosophy student and grad student, and there's a lot to me. There's a lot of the conclusions I drew about ethics are thrown in here. It's a character trying to do the right thing, but also recognizing that redemption doesn't come from it. You don't have a redemption act. You don't get redeemed by killing the emperor and saving, the sacrifice. Like, that's not how life works. You get redeemed by trying to do the right thing every day for the rest of your life. So, and sometimes you fail.
Yeah. I think, and I think you achieved that. Like, one thing that I also want to look at, because obviously we already said there's a lot of like comic book superhero influence on the novel. But comic books obviously are a graphic format, and you can achieve a lot of stuff with pictures. There's a lot of energy in someone punching someone. How difficult is it to actually transfer those elements of the superhero comic into a written book, like into text? Because we have like comic book or graphic novel adaptations of novels, but the other way around, I feel, doesn't happen that much. So was that like difficult for you, or?
I don't know if I succeeded, so I don't know if I can answer that question. I guess
it's more like how do you go about that? How do you what's your thought process when you write an action scene or whatever to achieve that maybe that momentum or that energy that a lot of these big action panels in comics have?
There's some luck involved, and I think I write action scenes in a little bit the same way I write dialogue, which is I write it, and then I read it over and over again, and then it doesn't. I don't know how to describe. It doesn't sound right, which is different than having craft, right? When you have craft, oh, these sentences are too long. If I break them up into shorter sentences and have more paragraphs, the action will flow faster. That's where you actually know what you're doing, right? And then what I learned some of those tricks, right? Some of those tricks you vary pace by more or less description. You put in description where you want it. You have really short sentences when the action flows faster. There are tricks like that aren't. I mean, it's nothing special that I've discovered. I mean, these are common tricks, but that and I guess I have a vivid imagination. I've read a lot of comic books. There's a lot of imagery like locked away in my head that I can sort of refer to when I plan out a scene and when I write stuff. But it's not easy. Like, you can't write. I couldn't write a book that was wall-to-wall action and would still be like anything but exhausting.
But your imagery is more comic based. For example, when you read something like, say, Joe Abercrombie or George R. Martin, their action is often very cinematic. When you can just see, it reads like an action scene would be directed on TV or in a movie. And there's I think there's a difference in how violence or how action looks in like a comic book versus like a movie in a way.
That makes complete sense. I don't know that it was intentional. Like, I don't know that I could have done it any other way. Like, I write fight scenes the way I write fight scenes. It's like, again, it's not as much craft to it as just, I'm going to write what sounds good to me, and I hope it reads well to other people. But I've read a lot of comics, and I've watched a lot of movies too, but also a lot of martial arts movies, which are probably a little different in the way that they're framed. I've done a lot of martial arts. I studied karate for several decades. And I listen to a lot of, I watch a lot of MMA, and I listen to a lot of MMA analysis, which is sort of interesting because what I'm always trying to do in the fight scenes, which I don't know how many readers get it, but the movements and the strategies and the tactics used by the whoever's fighting reflects their personality. So, like, if one guy has more skill, he's going to throw jabs, he's going to feint, he's going to take little angles, and then someone who just depends on their brute strength will do the opposite. And I'm trying to always convey that. And then I have readers tell me, I just skimmed the fight scenes, I didn't really read them. And I'm like, but there was character development in the punching, and you can't just, people can read what they want, of course.
Yeah, of course. But would you say that MMA is closer to say comic book action because you have a broader variety of techniques compared to, say, just a karate or taekwondo or whatever, where both combatants use the same technique? And like a lot of action, like comic book is about like people, very distinct fighting styles going up against each other.
Yeah, and a lot of comic book action is drawn by artists who are lovely people, but many of them don't know anything about fighting, and you can tell that when you look at the comic book. But what the comic books get like you don't really want to watch a boxing match in a comic book for the most part. For the most part, it's not gonna look great.
Yeah.
But what comics get really great is the imagery of the superpowers. You
Mm.
know, the whole you know, like Superman with his arm out, you know, this iconic image of him arm out, the cape fluttering, and he's flying
Yeah.
through the sky. That's a very potent thing. You're not going to get that in any other format, you know.
Yeah, yeah. That was sort of what I was going for with my questions here, like how to transfer that into the written word, because it is very much about the picture, like a very pictorial thing there.
Yeah, I tried.
Yeah.
I
Do you?
did.
So here's the thing. So you recently actually produced the audiobook, and we're coming back to that in a moment as well. But it's like, before that, did you read out aloud scenes of it aloud, so you know how it like it reads differently when you read it aloud?
That
Or
is a very common practice that I did not do. I'm
okay.
not.
So it was the first time you heard the whole thing when you got the audiobook.
When I Yeah, when I so Wayne Farrell did the audio, and when the first time I listened to it was proofing his raw audio files.
Yeah.
It was very difficult because he doesn't sound exactly like me.
Yeah.
Right? The only way I ever hear Rohan's voice is in my head, and it's always my voice because it's my head.
Yeah.
And listening to someone else do it, he did a fantastic job. I don't mean any criticism. He did wonderfully. People really liked his reading, but it was so weird and strange for me to hear. I was like, it's not how I would have said that, but that's fine. You know, it might be better. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's already like a different thing between, you know, hearing your own voice recorded and you're like, that already sounds different. It sounds different in your own head always.
Yeah. And I always felt bad for him with all the stupid accents I put into the book because I, you know, and I'm you know, I was writing him the Ursins. So there are these talking bears in the book, and yes, there are talking bears, and they're played completely straight. So it sounds strange, but it's true. And in my mind, the way I wrote their dialogue is I always pattern them after this one character from the TV show Arrow, who is this Russian guy with this terrible Russian accent.
Yeah.
I think it was meant to be terrible. I think it was deliberate, but that's the voice I hear in my head when I write why did I give him, because I couldn't help the stupid, like, it's almost puns. I don't even know if it was worthy being called a pun to have your bears speak with Russian accents, but whatever, I had to do it.
Yeah.
So then my poor narrator is like, wait, so these guys sound kind of Russian, and the AI should just sound flat, and I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm sorry. Just do what you can. I did not write it with the thought of how is this going to be translated to audio.
Yeah.
So I don't have any dialogue tags, you know, and a lot of it's Rohan's internal voice on the page is italicized. That's how I indicate it. But I don't necessarily say he thought, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I don't know how the heck the narrator's he pulled it up. I think, you know, you have to change his tone to, this is the part that where he's thinking it, this is the part that he's saying out loud, but it wasn't well done by me. I gave him a very tough job trying to get all that.
Yeah, but I would agree. He does a great job. He did a great job with it. How's the response been so far to the audio?
Feedback I've gotten has been excellent. So people who have commented say they really like the audio. Yeah. So the sales are another story. That's a whole conversation in itself.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. But do you think it's like a new market? So people picked it up that did not pick up the books, the printed books or the ebooks?
I know some people did. So, you know, I released this all, and, you know, I did this all wrong from a marketing perspective, really badly, but I guess I couldn't help myself. So I definitely have audiobook readers who I don't know who they are, but I also had definitely a number of people on Discord, because I'm on a few Discords with some of the other reviewers who have been championing the book, which has been lovely, and saying, oh, you guys should read this book, which is great. So people are like, oh, I want to get to it, but not yet. And then when the audio came out, they jumped on. So that was nice and gratifying. And then I assume there are other, based on the number of sales, I don't think it can just be the sales of just people I know. So, but it's very weird. Like, you have a book and you'll say, oh, you know, you sold 10 audiobooks or whatever. And I don't know who those people are. And then if they don't leave a review, I never know who they are. So I don't know what happened. Did they not read it? Did they read it and love it, but just not say anything, which is understandable. I don't know that I've been great about reviewing every book I read, but
And I think
But
that's an interesting thing that I mean, depending on whether you want to go too much into that, but I feel that's part of the self-publishing process. You said you decided to self-publish the book, and it, I mean, when you started doing this like 2 years ago, 3 years, you
yeah,
know, um, I feel like compared to today, even in the last 2 years, there's been so much more information out there, like easily available information on how to do the self-publishing process, how to go through all of that.
yes,
Um,
yes.
so like how tough was it to figure that stuff out beyond just like I'll do this thing and then I'll just like, I mean, I guess in theory I could just sit down and write a story, which is hard enough, format it myself and upload it on Amazon, and then probably nothing will happen.
Well, here's the thing: if you just did that and you uploaded it to Amazon, I can pretty much guarantee nothing would happen.
Yeah.
Even if your text was one of the best fantasy novels ever written, which I have no doubt it would be. Um,
Yeah.
because you upload is competing on Amazon with, so many other books, and at a quick glance, no one can tell, which one is worth even opening and looking at the first page.
Yeah.
It's impossible, right? So, but if you were to write a book, I mean, first of all, you would, message me on Discord, and I would give you a bunch of advice to not do it exactly that way. But you
Yeah.
also have advantages in that, if you wrote a book, you have friends who have large audiences,
Yeah.
who I am sure would be thrilled to look at your book and like at least read the first couple chapters, and if they were great, read the rest, and then champion that
Yeah.
on channels, like, people, other booktubers.
Yeah.
I had nothing like that. I had no connections to the booktube community. So you could leverage that. I'm saying,
Yeah.
in a good, writing a good book is the first part. You can have friends in the booktube community. If the book's not great or the book's not good, they're not gonna, throw down for you for the most part. But if you wrote a really good book, you could get it out there that way. But someone who's just like, like living at home somewhere in there,
Yeah.
and they don't have connections, it's really tricky. And superhero stories was probably a bad move, from a sense of, if I wanted to ever make money on this, it's probably not the right choice.
You should write grimdark fantasy.
Yeah, I can't. I got very, I have bad days and good days, in terms of frustrations and whatever. And one day I was like, screw this, I'm going to write. So part of the problem right now is my production costs are very high. I have a wonderful cover artist who's fantastic, but not, he works for traditional publishing, Chris McGrath.
Yeah.
And he does amazing covers. I love them to pieces, but it costs money, and then my editor is fantastic. My line editor, Laura Donovan she's wonderful. She makes my everything better than it was when I wrote it, but she's so good. She's in demand, so she charges more, which she should. I'm not upset. Right? I'm not this isn't a criticism at all. She should charge a lot, but she's great.
Yeah.
But I just can't afford to keep writing like 1 or 2 books a year. 2 books a year. I like to do 2 books a year, and keep paying for that.
Yeah.
not make it back. Like, I don't need to make a profit, but
I think that there's an interesting discussion there, because as I said, like, I mean, I do the record label stuff. I've paid cover artists, and I paid them quite a bit, but it was still like, you sit there and it's like, actually, when you think about like how much time they spent doing this, I remember like one cover artwork, that was 750 or 700 pounds, something like that.
Sure.
But it's like, it's actually done in like, it's a physical painting.
Oh, wow.
It's a physical painting. So someone actually went and did the whole thing.
Yeah.
That stuff takes time. And if you break that down to like hours,
sure,
they make basically nothing. And it's like, it's the same for an editor. So
yes.
In general, art is generally underpaid and undervalued for all kinds of reasons.
They deserve what they get. I have no reservations at all.
Yeah.
I just if the upfront cost is, if I've got to spend, thousands of dollars per book to publish it, and I'm not recouping even a tenth of that, then I have to at some point stop, because at some point my wife's going to say, I like to go on a nice vacation, like
Yeah.
I assume you can pay for half of the cost of this nice vacation that we shall take together. And I'll say, well, no, I can't, because I spent all my money this year writing two
Book
more
covers.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah, on book covers and editing and unfortunately audio, the audio is not cheap. Wayne did a great job. He deserves every penny. But if I can't make that money back on sales, then I can't justify spending the amount.
Yeah, I absolutely feel you there, because as I said, like I see more like the music side of things, and man, art does not pay unless you're very much up there in the like very high percentage, like that's very small percentage that actually makes money off it, much less lives off it, but and that's like the other things, like how did you go about, for example, finding an editor? Because I'm pretty sure there's like there's self-published people out there who probably never ask an editor, or
so I'm laughing because the way I chose my editor was nonsensical. So I literally just, went on Google and I searched for, book editor or self-publishing editor or something. And I went to the first link and I found the person who looked like they would be doing, would be willing to do a sci-fi fantasy story. And it was probably she was great. She definitely helped me out with a bunch of things, but probably not the right. I probably should have gotten someone more familiar with the genre.
Yeah.
And then for my second, and then she was charging a little more than I really was comfortable with. So for the second round, for the second book, I went and I literally found an ad on Reddit, and that the second time worked out because Laura Don, she did a fantastic job for me. Helped me, I'll say this: there's a few times where we really kind of argued and battled, and every time we did, she was right. And like by a few days later, I was like, you were right. I was using this word wrong in a way that was just going to confuse people and wasn't going to contribute anything, and I should have changed it, and I did. So that's a pretty good sign.
I find this very interesting because I recently read the Terry Pratchett biography, which is a fantastic book.
I saw your talk about it with
Derry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. But like the interesting thing is that he just like Rob, who's Pratchett's assistant at the time, he describes exactly that. It's like that, they hand in like a manuscript, and then the editor calls him, and then Terry got onto like on a fight with them on the phone, and slams down the phone, and like half an hour later, he's like, "Damn it, she's right."
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people I've seen like young writers describe their fears that an editor will ruin their vision. And that is simply, you may get the wrong editor who maybe that'll happen, but a good editor will do the opposite. A good editor, my editor will come back with a manuscript and I'll go, this is what I meant to write and I failed.
Yeah.
But they fixed it for me, so now it's good. So it's always, I actually really like seeing the drafts I get back because of that. Because I'm like, this is better than what I wrote. Okay. But it's hard to catch it yourself, like echoes are my favorite example. I use a word too many times in a paragraph or in a page. But with the reader, man, I realize is you may have written that page over a week, right? You may have written the first paragraph, then you go, you have your life, and you come back, write the next paragraph. So you use the word, but to you're only using the word every 48 hours, not 3 times in one page.
It came like with Wistful Ascending. It was one of those things. Like a lot of things are teardrop shaped in this book.
Or what?
A lot of things are teardrop shaped in this book. So and I know what you mean, but it came up a lot. And I'm like, okay.
There's my E.E. Doc Smith roots. Have you ever read E.E. Smith?
No.
So he's the sort of grandfather of space opera. So his books were on my parents' shelves when I was a kid.
Okay.
So really, man, he was a chemistry professor. Wrote the most space opera-y of space opera books. Like his heroes were they were superheroes. They could do everything, and
very Flash Gordon-y.
And he had this escalation of technology and powers to the point where by the later books in the series, these two like intergalactic empires were literally tossing planets at each other as weapons, like entire planets. They put an engine on them, send them off, and he said that the big ships would go so fast that even in space they needed to be aerodynamic because there'd be enough gases. They were all teardrop shaped, which was apparently the most efficient way for going through. So I latched onto that.
I mean, it makes sense. It was just like really like there was, you know, there was like the Urson ship is teardrop shaped.
Oh yeah, they all are.
The core of Wistful is teardrop shaped, and I'm like,
well, there's a reason for that. I mean, it's well, the core of Wistful being a teardrop shape is it's not much of an Easter egg, but it's, you know, it's a hint at her origins, which we find out more about in book 3. I like to have a lot of little stuff where like, oh, I want the reader to be like, huh, wonder if that means something. Like, not like you're going to stay up at night worrying about it, but just sort of make you want to read the next book to see if these questions get answered. And the answer is yes, some of them do. So that's the goal.
That's another question. Like, did you conceptualize the whole thing as a series when you started with Wistful Ascending, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I mean, from a comic book perspective, right, you always have this. But the thing I don't like as much about comics, the thing that always frustrated me is the sense of, and from a marketing perspective, you understand it, but things don't change, or they rarely change. I mean, stuff changes more now, but they tend to have a reversion to the status quo every so often because, you know, you don't want a reader to hop on and say, oh, I've got to read 10 years of back issues. You don't want your 12-year-old kid to, you want them to go to the store and pick up a comic and sort of be able to follow along.
Yeah, they're a bit more like episodic TV where you kind of know that stuff will return to the same thing again. It's like, like the Simpsons, like Simpsons start at the same thing every time.
Yeah, but exactly. But then there are TV shows that do have a progressive, I'm a big Babylon 5 a fanboy. And, you know, that was a story. Like things happen, and every season the status quo was not the same as, you know, it constantly shifted every episode. Things actually changed. They actually moved. And I love that. I remember the first time I found that was Japanese cartoons on TV when I was a kid. There was one called Battleship Yamato, I think. That wasn't the name it came under, but they were on this battleship that had to go far to like defeat these aliens. Even it was a kid's show.
I think it's called Spaceship Yamato after the battleship, like the original battleship. But yeah, I know what you mean.
I think so, and I might have it wrong, and you know, someone can eviscerate me in comments if they remember what it was actually called. Star Blazers was how it was released in this country. Star Blazers was the title here, but if you go to the Japanese and you try to find the original, it's not. But every episode there'd be like a countdown. Like we're now like 250 days away from the alien, 258. You know, the countdown changed. This is amazing. Stuff's actually happening. We're getting somewhere. So I patterned the series, you know, very much after Harry Dresden, and I know some people have feelings about Harry Dresden, but for good reasons and bad reasons. But I really like the series of standalones format. You know, Harry Dresden. Have you've discussed them, and I don't know how have you.
I've read them up to book 10, I think.
Okay.
Like we discussed them with my thumbnail wizard and current dungeon master John and Cal from Really Good and Kind, and we recorded them up to book 10, but I think only the first 2 or 3 are actually edited and up. But I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I've watched those videos. They were great. But you know, you get this sense of every book's a self-contained story, but things do happen. I think the status quo changes. You know, here he's enemies with this person, then they're friends. You know, like there's a progression. The power set progresses very slowly. I've read all the ones that are out. So there's more stuff coming. But I really like that format. You know, and I had an idea for a story I wanted to tell that was going to be very big. You know, so people ask me how many books are going to be in the series, and I always say 25 because it just seems like an absurdly large number. But you know, I don't actually know if it's going to be 25, but I definitely have a big storyline where I'm like, I kind of know where I want Rohan to be 10 years later, very loosely, and it's not going to be where he is now, and things will have changed.
Well, he's going to be emperor, isn't he?
Well, I can't really say, but I have other properties I need to make my homage to. You know, other comics where I need to pay my respects with storylines. You know, I paid my respects to Bollywood a little bit. I paid my respects to Invincible. I have other people. I honor the Avengers in book 2, so I've got to honor some more people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That I just wonder if like the idea of like having this more horizontal kind of storytelling where the status quo changed is something that TV adopted when like video recorders, VCRs became sort of affordable, because I mean, the advantage of having like returning to the status quo is that if people miss an episode,
Right.
and there's no chance for them to actually catch that episode because you can't record television, there's a reason to make that. But once people can, in theory, home record their favorite TV show, they can pick up on that stuff afterwards, and then that opens up the possibility to tell like an ongoing story in a way.
Yeah, and you can go online. You know, they want you to go and buy old seasons and catch up to where you were. You know, which you can do. So absolutely. And I think some smaller properties did it and were successful and celebrated, and then it caught on with the more major networks. I don't watch network TV anymore. It's been a long time.
Yeah. I was just wondering. So you're a lot of, paying a lot of, you just said like pay a lot of homage to comic books, but there's also, a lot of space opera stuff in there.
Oh yeah.
Is space opera your love there, or did it just feel like the best way to combine those two ideas? Because, superheroes and grimdark, I don't know if that works, or superheroes and, hard sci-fi, I don't know. Did that just like mash naturally? Because space opera is also a bit, plays a bit fast and loose and fast with like the rules of stuff.
I mean, a lot of space opera and a lot of comics already converge. I was a big fan, and I don't know if they're actually good or, sometimes I like bad things. I always say this often, right? But like Simon R. Green had this series of books called Death Stalker. And which is just as campy and space opera-y as the name, suggests.
Yeah.
And it was super powered, main characters, flying around through space, interacting with magical artifacts, that happens. And it's a lot of comics have a very heavy, a lot of comic books are set in space.
Yeah.
The Griffin, which is a comic that I took the name from. I named my main character after it, which was like a short-lived DC like standalone published 30 years ago, like 91. But it's about a guy fighting for human. They give him superpowers and they have him fight for this alien armada of spaceships. So I do like space opera. I've read quite a bit of it when I was young. Like I said, I grew up on E. Doc Smith and Deathstalker and a whole bunch of others.
Yeah, that reminds me. Tiago Abdallah asked me to ask you who the real Griffin King is and why it is him.
That's not fair. Tiago is beating me and terribly. We entered the same contest. And he's a finalist, well deserved. And I'm like, you can't give me any victories here. I didn't start this fight. I just want to make it clear. But Tiago loves Griffins. We're on this Discord together. Yeah. He's like, there's so many Griffins in my story. And at one point, I don't know who started it, but I was like, I have more Griffins than you. There's a Griffin on the cover of every book. And it's even in the name of book 2. None of your books have the word Griffin in the name, not even one of them. So clearly, I am the Griffin King and you are not. So I probably should not have started a fight with someone who is so good at smack talk. It's a mistake on my part.
But okay, now to a more serious question, and that I think is you just said like space opera and comic books kind of converge, and I wonder if that's partly because both of them basically start superheroes and space opera kind of start both in like the 1930s pulps when you read stuff like Clark Ashton Smith or those kind of authors and like the Weird Tales and stuff, which clearly kind of moves into comic books once comic books become, financially viable because people can actually print colorful pictures and and not just, writing cheaply. But that's sort of where those two kind of things start. So it kind of feels natural that those kind of converge or cross paths again in a way.
Yeah, and the roots of comic books and superheroes, I mean, people say, it's science fiction. Superman was kind of a science fiction story. I mean,
he's an alien. He comes from a different planet.
He arrived on a spaceship, right, from another planet, and somehow our sun gives him powers, which always bugged me. But but I mean, it's not. It may not be good science. I mean, it's certainly not hard science fiction. I shouldn't use the word good. I apologize. It's not hard science fiction, but it's
Yeah.
Superman's a space opera, you know. I don't know that I've ever heard from people like Jim Starlin or well, so many of the comic writers really did space oriented stories. I don't remember ever hearing an interview with them where they explain why, but the visuals are just you know,
yeah, I mean,
cool.
that's the other thing. They look good. They look good on page. Space looks cool.
Spaceships are just going to look better than like a plane. And we see planes, but you can, but it, you know, the virtual effects in a comic are free. You know, drawing a cool looking spaceship is not more expensive than drawing a plane or a car. Yeah. So why not throw that in? But comics have a long history of going to space. You know, like Superman came from space. You know, all the DC I know had a lot of stories set. I'm much more of a Marvel guy. But it's very, you know, it's very common. So people think that, and you know, even in the movies, you know, the Marvel movies, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy, Ms. Marvel, they all have major sections of the movie taking place on other planets and on spaceships. And I'm just like, I just like it, you know? and it gives me room to do cool stuff. Like, you know, you can have you know, I like the high tech and the artificial intelligences and all that just because it's neat.
Yeah, you know,
I can tell bigger stories.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so another thing that I wanted to touch upon, and it kind of comes back to that more, I don't want to say aspirational, but yeah, more positive, upbeat kind of thing. Yeah. The station Wistful is very, very cosmopolitan, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And I did really appreciate that, because you can see all these different alien species, these different cultures meshing and talking to each other and doing other things to each other and trying to figure that stuff out, which I found interesting, because so much is very, you know, so much of fiction is still very much about, you know, cultural conflicts in a way. And we rarely get like these, hey, here's a bunch of species and they're all happy together. So kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, people like to throw in, okay. So I wanted to write, you know, I'm writing, it's a fantasy, right? Yeah. So if I'm going to write a fantasy, I'm going to make it cool. I wanted to make Wistful a place where I'd be really like to live. Mm-hmm. And is it realistic to have all these cultures sort of mixing and like basically getting along? Maybe not. I mean, if someone said, Joe, that would never happen, you know, they'd all be fighting over one person's religion saying you shouldn't eat fish and the person's religion saying you should only eat fish, you know, and they would fight. And I'm like, maybe, you know, I can't really prove you wrong, but I like this idea that Wistful is like a socialist paradise. Yeah. You know, people work because they want to keep busy, but no one really needs to. The station has, you know, Wistful's, because it's an art, you know, she's in charge. So you don't have people mucking things up by passing laws that because they literally can't. Yeah. So it's a benevolent this is the other part of it. It's a benevolent dictatorship, right? Yeah. Wistful makes the rules, and you don't get to say. But all she really wants is people to be happy. You know, they're literally inside her. You know, she just wants them to all get along and be happy. So I made it cosmopolitan and I made everything sort of, you know, yeah, could I have had a long, you know, storyline where there are crusades going on in the alleys of? I could have, but yeah, I just didn't want to.
I find this interesting. So I've recently, for all kinds of reasons, read some essays and interviews and stuff by China Miéville, whom I absolutely love as an author for all kinds of reasons. Yeah. Not least that he's a socialist, or even a communist.
I'm a big fan.
And he said something very interesting then. It's like the great gift that J.R. Tolkien gave to fantasy and science fiction or whatever is world building, because world building allows us exactly that. It allows us to build the world that we want to live in. It allows us to build the worlds, and that opens up, you know, that opens up the imagination for those possibilities, because you have to imagine and dream of better worlds before you can actually go there. And so going and writing, you know, your Wistful as a Socialist Utopia is exactly what that is. Like, why would you make all your fictional worlds that you just made up yourself, why would you make them as horrible as our worlds? Like, you have the entire imagination to play with. Why not do that?
Yeah, it's like you know, I'm hugely inspired by Robert Kirkman, in terms of Invincible, but he also did The Walking Dead, which I find very uninspirational because it's like, well, what if there was a zombie apocalypse and everyone was terrible? And I'm like, what if there was a zombie apocalypse and everyone was lovely? And they got really banded together and tried to get along. Maybe it would be a terrible story. I mean, not fun to watch. But part of what I was trying to do, so let me back up 1 second. It's traditional in action stories and in like stories to have, the tension that drives the story is a try-fail cycle or a fear of failure. The heroes are going to die, or they're going to not save the earth, or there's always this. And then I was watching a bunch of these action movies from South India, Telugu movies in particular, where the heroes are so competent that you never really think there's a risk. It's just how cool are they going to look on screen? How cool will they be when they win? You don't really ever think they're not going to win. You don't have this feeling of tension, like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? How are they going to get out of this? You're like, oh, they'll get out of it. They're going to look awesome doing it, and I can't wait to see that. So you watch the next scene driven by this different sort of curiosity, enjoyment. You're not driven by fear and tension. And I tried to write a book where I was doing more of that.
Yeah, I can see that.
They do.
Yeah, I think that, and up to a point, I think that's once again something that is very much ingrained in the classic comic book, right? It's like Superman's not going to die.
Right.
You want to see how he's going to beat the bad guy. That's the question.
Right. He's not just going to beat, like, because in early Superman comics, he wasn't fighting like guys who could fight him. He was fighting like mobsters, or actually, he was fighting normal people, and yeah, exactly. Unless they had kryptonite, it was a foregone conclusion. And it was, how cool is he going to look flying over something, and how lovingly will Lois Lane gaze at him as he saves her, and with her big doughy eyes or whatever. And that was the joy, I was definitely inspired by that sort of thinking. Can I make you want to read, even though you're pretty confident Rohan's going to be fine? Because you're pretty confident he's going to be fine. You should be, if you're paying attention when you're reading it. I was never meant to have someone feel this, like, the sick feeling in their stomach about, oh my God, who are these people? I know a lot of authors, like, I can't wait to kill off some more main characters. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. Like, it's not happening.
No, and I think it's we tend to, there's. Yeah, I think you hit it on a nail there with, like, the nail on the head there with the whole idea of the fear spiral things. Like, I never thought about it that way, but yeah, and there's reasons why this is sort of like the dominant like storytelling tradition right now in the West, in a way. But maybe switching it up some is actually a good idea.
And I really want to, there's nothing wrong with writing grimdark or relying on that fear spiral. And if you do it well, fantastic. That's not what I wanted to do. I keep saying, like, I just want to be very clear. There's lots of good ways to tell, different kinds of stories. You just have to know what kind of story you're trying to write when you're trying to write. And I knew what kind I was trying to write. Like, I was clear on that. I wanted something a lot more chill. And bad things happen, but they're not so bad.
Yeah. I do believe there's a market, not only a market for that nowadays, but I feel like it's actually kind of becoming, it's kind of growing these days. You see something like Legends and Latte being sort of like a surprise hit this year, and like how trends kind of swing around like a pendulum, basically. And I think we're slowly moving away from the grimmest of grimdark. And there's always going to be people that love grimdark, and that's fine. I mean, I just spontaneously finally read A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie, and I loved it in a lot of ways. And I'm good with that. But I feel like the general market for actually positive escapism is becoming bigger, especially in a way, I would say, for a more progressive escapism, because if you're a more progressive thinking person,
you need to escape.
Shit looks bleak right now.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe sometimes you actually want to flee into like a world that's actually cool. You can see that with like a very specific love for like for like a more cute aesthetic and all of these things. And I'm I guess I'm too toxically masculine to actually ever enjoy that. But I recognize I recognize the need for that, like a place where where things are cozy, where things are where you feel safe. Because despite whatever people are claiming about like safe spaces and whatnot, our world is not a safe space for people that may have, that are not white cis hetero males,
Yeah,
to put it
yeah.
mildly.
I
So yeah,
actually,
we need that fiction.
I think that's part of why. Okay, I don't want to say this wrong because it could easily sound wrong. I think that's part of why queer fiction is so popular. Because if you think about it, in terms of queer people, it's still a relatively small percentage of the population.
Yeah.
But I think anyone says, okay, if you're writing a queer romance, I know it's going to be a relatively safe space from a sort of political standpoint, because
Yeah.
maybe not know is maybe, but you're much more likely that I'm going to be okay with the general aesthetic that's happening in here.
Yeah.
And so people really latch on. I'm not criticizing that at all. I think that makes a lot of sense. That's not what I'm writing, because it's not what I don't feel comfortable writing that, just in the sense of being a straight dude who's probably not the right person to tell that kind of story.
But you have a queer character in there, and I love that the way you introduced that. I mean, obviously, I'm a straight dude as well, so I can't judge. But the way that the one conversation between those two Ursons, those two bears about queerness, it felt interesting in a way, because someone was making a gay joke and it felt comfortable, in a way. And I was like, yeah.
So I wrote that, and then a year after, I'm like, should I have written that, like, on a very superficial level, straight white dude writing a gay joke? Maybe this isn't okay. And then I read it by some friends. I mean, it's not pejorative,
No.
It's a very not, I wouldn't write a pejorative gay joke, because I don't.
But I think that's why it works, because for me it felt like, yeah, this world is so comfortable that people can make that joke.
Yeah.
And the other way around.
Yeah.
They could make a very sexual joke about the hetero dude as well, and it would work just as well. That's the point. It felt normal and comfortable.
Yeah. I really tried to populate the world with a bunch of nice people you'd want to have dinner with, which is some of the feedback I got, was people like, oh, I'd like to hang out with these characters. And I'm like, good, that's exactly what I was shooting for. Like, that was the goal. Yeah. And even to spend more time. So buy book 2.
I do appreciate that. So there's a bunch of questions. Like, one, the ship mines, or like the ships. Did you get inspiration from the Culture series by Enam Banks for that, or did you come up with that on your own?
No, I mean, I may have indirectly, in terms of reading people influenced by that, but I've only read 1 or 2 culture books, and it was a very long time ago. Very long. I don't remember.
There was like a bunch of these things, like ship names felt slightly cultural. The one ship being called the Artistic License. That feels and I love the joke, but that feels very much like a culture ship name in a way.
Oh, coincidence. I just tried to be funny. They're all just ship names that struck me as amusing. Insatiable just struck my whimsy. I need, I don't plan those. I don't even know if I plan. I mean, Wistful I named to make the title work 2 ways.
Yeah.
Right. Which I like all my titles have to work 2 ways. That's my rule, because otherwise if you just know what the title means, it's boring. But by the end of the book, you should be like, oh, the title could actually be read to mean 2 completely different things, which was, like, I like putting stuff like that in. The chapter titles, I don't know how many of them are, but like a good half of them are like stupid jokes. That
I did appreciate some of them very much. There was like the hammer and nail joke was really good.
Things are still nails.
Yeah.
Your only tool is a hammer, right? And I don't think I ever used the first part of that.
No, but it still worked. I really appreciate it. That made me smile.
It's always nice when someone says that, because I'm like, okay, how obscure was this reference that maybe no one but me will get? And you always hope someone else will catch.
There was one joke in there where I'm like, that's like a deep cut when Rohan talks to someone. Is like, I don't know how to make friends and influence people, and I'm like, it's one of those like double takes where I'm like, did he just? Yeah, he did.
Yeah. I tried, you know, because if it's not, I mean, again, I write, if I'm going to write a book, I'm gonna want you to sort of basically feel good most of the time reading the
Yeah.
book. And there's might be, you know, there's some dark stuff does happen, but it's you know, it's in the minority. And you know, jokes are my you know, there are people who read it and just think it's funny, and that's all they get out of it. That's the number one thing they get out of it, which was not my intention. But that's fine. I mean, that's fantastic. If someone like thinks it's funny, great. You know, like
Yeah.
I'm thrilled. But I didn't sit down. I did not sit down to write a funny book, and nothing in the plot is comedic.
No.
Right. There's no part. That's the thing. A lot of superhero stories told to adults are comedies, right?
Yeah.
The heroes have silly names, and the things that happen to them are silly. And I don't know the right way to explain it, but that was not, you know, people may say funny things and do funny things, but the story is not meant to be funny in any way.
Yeah. I don't know if that helps or whatever, but it felt it sort of went into like a similar vein for me as does the stuff that Terry Pratchett does. It's different. It's different, obviously, but it does go in in like a similar direction with like, you have a good story to tell, but you're willing to, you know, break immersion to make a joke like that, make friends and influence people. There's room for that like meta joke in there, and there's humor. And I think that's like the strength of what Terry Pratchett does so well, and what some other very few other authors, like, you know, obviously Douglas Adams and some others get there, which is there's comedy in life. Just if you sit back and look at like how we humans interact with how people interact with each other, there's room for humor there, always.
I agree 100%. Yeah. And there are places where I have characters that are just comedic, but they're the low level threats. I like the bumbling thief archetype, which I don't know if is in Wistful Ascending as much. It shows up in later books where you know, just Rowan having to interact with people causing trouble who are just incompetent. And that's a little silly. It ends up being a little silly, but it's okay. I mean, I'm okay with a little bit of that. The major plot points are never met. You're not supposed to laugh at the major things that are going on.
Of course.
You know, even book 2 is about giant sharks attacking. And I told this to my artist, and he's like, he hadn't read the books, you know, because that's not his job.
Yeah.
But he's like, oh, so it's kind of a goofy story. And I'm like, no, the giant sharks are completely serious. Like they're straight. It's like a Godzilla movie. It's not meant to be funny at all.
Like one of the good Godzilla movies.
Yeah, one of the good Godzilla movies. He's like, oh, and he did an amazing, the cover's amazing.
Yeah.
But I don't think he got the tone at first that I was going for. He got it once I said it, but yeah. So it's
that's an interesting thing, because I feel like Godzilla is a good example, because Godzilla has shifted like in like the public, like the Western perspective so much from that first Godzilla movie to, you know, all the stuff in between, you know, King of all monsters and stuff like that over time. Godzilla has shifted so much in perspective. When you say Godzilla now, I'm like, hey, it's a giant dinosaur that can shoot, you know, stuff, and it's kind of funny, isn't it? And I've watched the original Godzilla movie, and that is not a funny movie.
It's not supposed. It does not supposed to come across as goofy. They didn't put a guy in a rubber suit thinking we would find it goofy. No, they were trying to make it scary. It was scary, the first one.
Yeah, and I would recommend everyone go and watch that first Godzilla movie. It's the intensity in that movie is great. And I mean, I know you've not named those monsters kaiju for nothing.
No. I'm not the biggest fan. I mean, I definitely watched Pacific Rim, which was definitely got some inspiration, some inspiration from there. I watched a lot of stuff and read a lot. You know, I'm an old man who reads a lot of stories, so. You know.
But I think that's I mean, all the good authors, all of the great authors that you ask, they'll usually read a lot.
Yeah.
Read all over the place so you can, you know, recognize good ideas when you find them.
Yeah, and I really think many of them, if you read critically enough, that's good enough. But if you don't read critically on your own, you also really need to have some structure, like have some craft, like watch I'm a huge fan of, as a writer, if anyone wants to write, you've got to take some writing courses or read craft books or even just watch like a Brandon Sanderson teaches a course on how to write science fiction at Brigham Young, and he has recorded his lectures and put them on YouTube for free.
I've watched those.
Huh?
I watched those, and I disagree with him on a lot of things, but I see what you mean.
I just think they're fantastic because so much of what he's doing is he's not saying this is how to write. He's saying these are the choices you have to make. If you do this, this is what it's going to do to your story. If you do this, it's going to do a different thing in your story. You're going to get a different kind of story, and ties it all together in a way that I find most people could use.
Yeah, definitely.
He's not my favorite writer. Like, I mean, but I love those videos so much because I just what you learn about what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know.
And again, I remember I watched those, and I'm like, I disagree with all your choices, with all the choices you made, Brandon.
But he's okay with that. He's not saying you should. Yeah. He's very careful. He says
he even mentions Malazan in it, which I was like, wow. He knows.
I remember that. Yeah.
In the world building thing, he's talking about like info dumps and stuff. And it's like you can either explain your world, or you can just like have your reader hit a wall, and that's basically Malazan. I'm like, well, apparently he knows of Malazan. He maybe has even read one.
But Malazan, I love those. Are my you know, I mean, my dream in life is to be called the Steven Erikson of superheroes, right? Someone says that non-ironically, I will slit my wrists because I've reached the pinnacle. That's never really going to happen.
All right, don't ever tell Joe that thing.
Don't tell my wife, because she knows how much life insurance I have, and she'll just whisper it to me one day. But I love Malazan, but Malazan's hard. A lot of people don't want to read it. Like they read halfway through the first book, or they read even a couple books, and they're like, I don't know what's going on. I'm stopping. I'm DNFing this.
Yeah.
And you know, he made and there's no choice you make that's going to make everyone happy. With that. I mean, I did my world building in a very. I think I basically avoided info dumps. Yeah. But I also definitely have people who come to me and say, I don't understand what's going on with this and this and this.
I think there's like one info dump, but you handle it really well. That's actually what I really appreciated. That's the conversation that Rohan has with Ursula on
my editor
on
made me add that was not in the first draft.
Okay.
And I still kind of wish I didn't do that.
I think it works because while it is technically Rohan telling her everything, you still manage to write it in a way where she actually makes like actual contributions that go beyond just like yes ending him, but she actually points out things. So I think it felt less brutally info dumpy than some things that I've read in my life.
Thank you. That was not in the first draft. My editor made me add that, and I kind of resent it.
I think your editor at the time had a point in that the metaphysics concept had to be explained, or at least explained more at some point.
Yeah. No, it may be a better book for it, but it's not what I wanted to do. That and what else? I had to mention his skin color earlier on, which is probably less of an issue for my editor. It was my editor was surprised when he wasn't white. Right? Which makes sense, because I realized this much later. Like, she didn't look at a copy with a cover on it.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's no cover, because she's just raw text, right? It's just a Word document. I don't know if it was as important, but she was very surprised. Because I was inspired by South Indian movies, I made him Indian, which is a thing that has almost no impact on the story. It's not a story about being an Indian
Canadian. Yeah.
I mean, that has almost no impact on any part of the story, and it never will. Like, it's not a story about that. I'm not telling the story of Indian immigrants here. That's not what I'm aspiring to do. It's just sort of a wink, wink. I was so inspired by these movies. I honored them by making that his nationality, but she was shocked by that. So I made a reference earlier on in the book to make it so anyone who wasn't sure, they would find out, like in chapter 2. So they wouldn't have the wrong image built in their mind.
Well, he's always pining for Indian food, isn't he?
Yeah, he is, but that's true of me, and I'm not Indian. So if I were on a space station, I'd be like, I miss samosas, So
have you read Neil Stephenson's last book? He has a Sikh character who grew up in Canada.
Yeah, I haven't read
and
that
who
master.
does a lot of martial arts.
I should definitely pick that up.
Maybe he read your book. It's like, hey, I can do that.
Yeah. No, I haven't read as much as Stevenson lately. There's so much to read, and now
It's
that
not
I'm,
his strongest book, but the character works very well.
oh, that's good. That's good.
One thing that was on, so it's interesting that Wistful, the space station, is gendered. And I was like, I found that interesting because you read that and it's like flat voice. It's an AI, but
Yeah.
it's always she's always referred to as she.
Well, in English, ships are she,
That's true.
and that was the original thought. And
Okay.
this actually becomes a plot point in book 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I mean, there's context to everything, which is that, the ships are built, are made
Yeah.
by the Ildroch, and they're made with a purpose.
Yeah.
And part of their
Mhm.
toxic masculinity that drives them is the ships, and their kids and their ships, they need them to be servile, I guess.
Yeah.
And I always had this vague notion that they want them identifying more as female, which is classically a more subservient gender,
Mm-hmm.
and they want the ships in that mindset, so to speak. They don't
Yeah.
want the
Okay.
ships deciding to do what they want to do and going off and not following orders, right? They have a
Yeah.
military empire to run. So there's a little bit of that.
I guess it also doesn't hurt that like everyone using AI voices nowadays thinks of them as female because Alexa and Siri have like female voices.
Yeah.
Because of course they have, because someone did market research and found out that people like to listen to female voices more because most of our early adopters are dudes.
Right. And our mom, when we're infants, we're raised by female voices. That's the thing. I also I'm not going to say I'm the I definitely I had an urge to have a little more diversity, and so I try to always keep in mind, like, okay, so I'm introducing a new character. I don't want this room with like 5 guys making all the decisions all the time. I really wanted to avoid. I wanted to pass the Bechdel test in this book. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about, and you definitely passed it. And I did like, I mean, the security chief, Whaley.
Yeah, Whaley.
Whaley, and when she has a conversation with the doctor about playing cards and stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah.
That was very, I tried to, imagine these people, they're women, he's sort of surrounded by women, but I didn't want to give off the harem vibe. I don't think I did.
No.
But I mean, they're again, nothing against harem stories. It just wasn't what I was going for, but more like his circle of friends.
Yeah.
And again, I really wanted to avoid a situation because I actually am running into a problem plotting book 4 where, just the way it's working to tell the story I want to tell. I end up having like too many guys in one place. And I'm like, okay, how do I make sure some of these voices are not male? But I think if you're a guy, right, I'm sure the first stories I ever wrote were like all male characters, except for the love interest. When I was a kid, I think that's natural, but you have to fight that.
I remember the first kind of D&D adventures I ran or played. It was very much that.
Sure,
and I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's like,
no,
stories are how we explore ourselves and how we see the world and stuff. And if you're a dude growing up in like a fairly rigidly gendered world, that's what you're gonna do. And then you're gonna move out and try out other stuff.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing people, but I wanted to write a story where that wasn't all happening. And I also wanted to write a story where like I don't want sexual tension between every pairing.
No.
Whaley is his friend, but is clearly not interested in sleeping with him, or vice versa. And I people respond positively to that. Like they like that. Like it's like they're actually friends.
Yeah, and the conversation, and I think it works really well because you kind of have that buddy cop kind of vibe there.
Yeah.
He's and it's interesting to have the main character of the story, Rohan, sort of be the sidekick for Whaley. Like he's the sidekick. He's not the main character when they are doing something together.
Well, I like those I like those like the detective with the big brutish assistant. the detective's like, I'll solve the crime, and then when the culprit comes at me with the knife, my assistant just steps in and slams him to the ground and puts the
Yeah.
cuffs on. So I always imagine Whaley and Rohan having that sort of dynamic.
Yeah.
Because that's what he's you're not going to get a better slam the guy down and put the cuffs on than a superhero, who can punch spaceships. So slap that in there. So
one thing that I really liked, like personally really liked near the end, is like the idea is like it's not about being good, it's about being nice. And I think that's sort of like one of those things that in current political debates kind of fall down, because what so much is about is like it's about dignity, and dignity is about being nice to other people in a lot of ways, and it's not about causes, or like right causes and wrong causes. It's very much about like be a nice person, and it might just actually help.
I mean, I studied ethics, like I get graduate level. Same stuff, right? So what you realize if you study ethics and you pay any attention is that 98% of your ethical or moral decisions do not require like any kind of like system, or you know what you're supposed to do almost all the time. Like most of the things that there are edge cases, there are medical very complicated, where you really have to like use some kind of system to try to figure out who gets the kidneys here, in this terrible, but most people don't deal with that.
Yeah.
Like, if you're driving on the highway and you're going to like let someone into your lane or not, what you're supposed to do, right? There's no.
Yeah, and most of that is happening subconsciously. It's an intuitive thing, because we know what's right intuitively.
But once you have an ethical system and you have that determines right or wrong, something like utilitarianism, just a stupid example, right? You can use that to justify some really horrific things, and people do all the time.
I always have that argument when like people are like, characters in Lord of the Rings are very, very, black and white, morally good and bad. It's like, no, that's because you're already assuming a very specific moral system. It's like, if utilitarianism is the rule, then Bilbo should have killed Gollum. Definitely.
Right.
Because Gollum walks out and tells people about it. The harm that Gollum causes by killing people is so much higher than anything else. It's just that Tolkien has a Christian pity-based ethics on there, and Gandalf is your authority figure. That's why you assume that. But like, Eric Singer would totally kill Gollum the first time he sees him.
Right. Just What's gonna help here? We know what's gonna. Well, that's the whole idea of Rohan. He's a post-utilitarian character, right? You get dribbles of it. I'm never going to write a book about atrocities he committed in his 20s, but I definitely say that he committed atrocities in his 20s.
Yeah,
and where he was put in a situation where this whole planet's going to die if I don't wipe out this whole city full of people or something. And so he did it, but now he's gotten to a point where he's like, I don't even care if that's right or wrong. I'm not doing that anymore. And that appealed to me as whether he goes on some sense back to that later on is something I can explore in the next 23 books. Or whatever, but I like the idea of someone who's just sort of saying like, we know this isn't nice. I'm not doing that. Even if it makes sense in some calculation that you're trying to impress upon me.
Yeah. And I think you've hit on something there, because if you're not a sociopath and you're applying utilitarian ethics on like everyday situations, not those edge cases where, stuff like utilitarianism might actually help. If you apply that kind of ethics in your everyday life, you'll feel bad. Maybe you should actually listen to that feeling.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's too easy for, you go to philosophy school, you're surrounded by clever people, and it's too easy for clever people to come up with clever arguments to justify all kinds of bad things. But you're not going to convince me that thing that's terrible is nice. Like you're not. Like, you can convince me that it's the right thing to do, but I'm so. I actually got a lot of grief for the nice thing. I had a very good friend say I should have used kind, and I was like, oh, maybe I should have. Maybe I should have. But be nice was something my dad used to say. Yeah. So I was literally taking it from my own family. And I was like, oh, I'll just keep it. It might not be the perfect
Yeah,
word.
but see, that's part of the interesting thing. Is like you shouldn't say nice, you should say kind. It's like, why? Because kind sounds more masculine, or what's the reason in the wording there? It's like, what's actually wrong with the term nice? Like, why would you think that's a bad term? And
I think nice, at least I think that the person's case, I mean, I'm speaking for someone else, so I may be wrong, but I think their case was nice is often used to be like, in the sense of tell the white lie.
Okay. Yeah.
Put a nice face on, but
Mhm.
but really hate that other person. But nice would be just on the surface, the exterior, and that's not really how I meant it. But they're probably not wrong in that there is that connotation there that I didn't mean.
Yeah.
You know, but again, my dad used to say to me, "Be nice," and that was always his I don't know, which wasn't always my inclination. So he was trying to get me to do the right thing.
Yeah, of
So
course.
I kept it. You know.
Yeah, but I think like whether you say nice or kind, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, it's sort of like, and I think there's an interesting thing here. Because there's that famous saying of people like Will Wheaton, who always repeats the whole like don't be a dick.
Yeah.
But that's a negative way to formulate it. It's like be kind or be nice is the positive side. It's like, why do you have to actually frame that in like don't be like this? It's like, no.
Right.
Be cool.
Be cool.
Yeah.
Be cool would have been good if that's a little more ambiguous, but it would have worked.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's more, be kind, be nice. It's a positive statement. It's like be like this.
Yeah.
And I think it's a different approach and a more optimistic, because you're looking towards the future. It's like there's a difference whether you say like don't be like this, or if you say like be like this. And I think it makes a difference. And I appreciate the fact that you go with that. It's like be positive, because that implies that you're trying to actually make the world a better place instead of just avoiding making it a worse place.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, again, these books are the closest I'm going to get to my PhD on ethics. It's not, it's not really going to be, but it is my moral thinking of, developed over, whatever, how many years is going into what Rohan chooses to do. And part of it is that he's not a pacifist. Part of it is that it's a retired gunslinger trope, but I didn't want the guy who's sitting around drinking himself to death, feeling terrible every day over what a horrible person he used to be.
Yeah.
Because I don't want that either. Like, that's not like anything I want to aspire to either.
No.
Like that we've seen that, that story's been done. So I tried to avoid that. And
why not have someone actually learn from their mistakes?
It seems so obvious when you say it, right? Like, try to learn from them. Like, I did the wrong, but that's it's like what would I teach my kid? Like, okay, you do a bad thing, you apologize sincerely, you try to do better every day from then on. And like, and then you don't have to sit there and beat yourself up over it for the rest of your life either. Yeah. So that was the goal.
I think, like, at least in the first one, I've only listened to the first one yet because, everyone else go buy that book. So Joe has enough money to actually
fund the second audiobook. Yeah. It's not cheap.
Yeah, I know. But once again, the problem is not that those people are asking too much money. It's more that because the way we streamline and commodify art means that at some point there's not enough money put into the system. And when you have like a large corporation behind you, they can shift around money. They can use some of the money from, say, the Brandon Sanderson sales and use them to pay for like new authors and hope that works. But you don't have a large corporation behind you, so there's a problem.
I mean, I tend to sound whiny when I talk about sales, and I really don't want to be. My life is pretty fine, like, please don't feel sorry for me. But, if my book was released by, Tor or Orbit, there'd be a lot more eyeballs on it.
Yeah.
And, a lot more money coming in, and certainly enough to pay for a narrator, but that's not how it worked, and it's hard to sell a superhero story. I have had many, many people say, oh, I heard superhero, and I was like, nah, but then I read it and I loved it. I'm like, well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. But the first part really breaks my heart because
I
You
think
know,
I think that's partly because superheroes have something of a bad rep these days.
yeah. Well, we think of them. I mean, even if they're not, even if you're a fan, right? Superhero stories are usually either for kids or they're movies that are spectacles, which is
Yeah,
not necessarily something you want to read as a novel, because
yeah,
or they're deconstructions, like The
yeah,
Watchmen and the Boys. I don't know if you've
yeah,
heard of The Boys. It's an Amazon
yeah. I know the
live
boys.
action. Okay, so I've
Yeah,
read the whole comic. I love the show. It's great, but fundamentally, it's saying, oh, these superheroes are just horrible, horrible people for the
yeah,
most part. And
yeah,
I'm like, but it's a fun story, but that's not what I want to.
yeah. It's
That's
it's it's
it's not.
like it's like playing your D&D paladin as a fascist, and it
Yeah,
works.
yeah.
I've done that, but I've done it once. I'm done with that.
That's great. Yeah, I miss D&D, but yeah, no, I love The Boys. It's a great story. I love the show and the comic, but that wasn't what I was going for, and it's not what people are necessarily in the mood for, especially when they're reading something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been that's fine. It is what it is. I'm writing a fantasy novel, a straight fantasy novel now.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's my work in progress. So I'm gonna bang it out hopefully in this month, and see if anything is different when I have a straight fantasy, a high fantasy book to sell. See if it's a little easier to pitch, but it probably won't be. I'll probably write something
Mm-hmm.
won't be easier to pitch.
Yeah, I see. I think that's part of like the issue, right? It's like, the big self-published novella of last year was Daniel Green, when he put his
Oh yeah.
Rebel's Creed out. Rebel's Creed is the second one. I think I keep forgetting what the first one is.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he put that one out, and I mean, he has a platform of 300,000 people watching it,
Sure.
and when Brandon Sanderson did his thing earlier this year, everyone's like, oh, he's changed publishing. I'm like, yeah, those people have a pre-established platform.
Yeah.
And the big thing, like the expensive part, is getting the art, getting the editing, getting all of that done, putting in the hours. That's the
Right.
expensive part. But the hard part is actually getting through the noise.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
and the sad part is, it's not just noise, right? Like there's thousands of books out there that are all great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not even that you're like, mine is the one fantastic book that everyone should read, and everything else is trash. That's not how it works.
And some books pitch well. Did we talk about Gideon the Ninth? I can't remember.
No, we didn't.
Okay, so
I
you're
know it
familiar with
exists.
it.
I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, Gideon Ninth, fantastic book. I loved it. But it was also a huge sensation in terms of sales and popularity, because, in my opinion, a large part of it was people heard the pitch, which is lesbian necromancer sorcerers and lesbian necromancer swordswomen in space.
Yeah.
And that just sounds so cool and different and intriguing. People heard those 4 words, and that made a lot of people pick it up. And then it was great, right? So it's a 2-tier process. But I certainly don't think I have a good 4 or 10 word pitch for Wistful Ascending. I've tried. People are like, oh, it's like Harry Dresden for sci-fi fans. And that's a great pitch, but none of it's really working well.
Yeah.
But if you're going to try to write a successful book, either have 300,000 viewers, or already have a publishing deal where you write New York Times bestsellers and people who care what you have to say, or have a book that pitches and blurbs really well. You need one of those.
And I think that's the other part that's really important. Is like, you still need to deliver, because when you look like sales, buzz, and all of that stuff, between Daniels, I'm not going to pick on him, because I actually did kind of enjoy that first book. I mean, it was a solid first effort. Right? I haven't written anything like that, but book 2 kind of bombs. Like the numbers have gone like drastically down. Because making that first splash can give you some recognition, but you still have to have something behind it. And Gideon the Ninth apparently did, because we're on like book 3 now, and people are still very much hyped about it.
Yeah, and she did interesting things too. I haven't read books 2 and 3 yet. I have them on my Kindle.
Yeah,
but they're also really different than book 1, which is really tricky to pull off.
Yeah,
and you'll turn off people, but you'll turn on other people. But I mean, again, I'm not saying it had a great pitch, but I'm saying it was a great pitch and it was a fantastic book. And that's a 1-2 punch that
Yeah.
led to a lot of sales and, well deserved
Mm.
for Tamsin Muir, I'm 2 degrees of separation away from her. I'm very excited because the one interesting fact about me is that my college roommate won a Hugo Award.
Wow.
Which is like the coolest thing that actually doesn't mean anything. Like neither of us were writers at the time. We haven't really kept in touch, and he was a lovely guy. But I'm like, I used to live with a guy who won a Hugo. So I'm like, wow. I want to put that in my marketing, written by former roommate of Hugo Award winning author John Chu, like in big letters, and make the former roommate of really small, on the cover, and see how many sales I can. I've never done that. But
yeah, but I think there's an interesting aspect there, and that is, apart from anything else, marketing is hugely important, and marketing is something that people need to have a talent for. And if you can be the best writer in the world, if you self-publish and you don't have the talent to just like actually be out there on 10,000 different subreddits, 10,000 Discord servers, have your own YouTube channel, do your book, your TikTok and Instagram and whatnot, no one will find out about you. And that's sort of the idea that's what people like Daniel Green started out as, being a marketing person, because that's what you are when you're on YouTube, basically. He's a performer first, and then he takes that and leverages that to sell his book, and I'm fine with that. And Brandon Sanderson had traditional publishing behind him to then build like an online audience as well. And of course, he can now self-publish if he wants to, and it'll work. And because people already know him. But if you're an introvert and you just want to write great books, how's anyone going to find out about that?
You got to go trade and pray.
Yeah,
trade and pray. Right. I think. I mean, I've definitely sold. I'm pretty active on social media. I've had not many, but I have had sales because I've been on, and people are like, I like your Twitter, so I bought your book. I'm like, that's awesome, like that, but not like tens of sales or hundreds of sales, certainly not, and then I've gotten a lot of reviews by begging.
Yeah.
And I literally just started like tweeting, like, oh, if you want a review copy, I'll send you one. And I did. And like some people, I got 2 guys one guy got the book and he was like, I got this book. And the other guy says, well, if you have it, I should read it. And the second guy read it, Jordan Buxton, and he read it and he gave it a good review, and he got a lot of other people to read it because he's on the Discords. And so the first guy who got Jordan, he still hasn't read the book. It's hilarious. I mean, there's no hard feelings or anything. It's just like there's such a weird, like tiny, like wedge in.
And and I think that's like the thing is, like, you asked me first about reading the book. Like, I feel super bad. Like, so I've been writing music reviews for over a decade at this point.
Sure.
And there is always that feeling of obligation that if you get something, you need to talk about it. And I'm fine tearing down a big name or something. If I get like a self-published author sending me their book, and I'm like, what if I don't like that?
And you probably won't.
And that's the point. Like,
I'm sorry.
And that's the point. Like, there's like this fear before I even open the books. Like, what if I don't like it? How do I do that? They sent me their love's labor. How do I do that? And
I sympathize. I felt kind of bad. I mean, I feel kind of bad asking people to read the book. I felt kind of bad asking you. I honestly wanted you to read the book because there are some kind of like slightly subtle jokes in there, and I was like, Raph will get these, and I'll just be happy knowing someone got these.
I guess you just know how to make friends and influence people.
Even if you just read it and never said a word to anyone, I would know that you had laughed or something like that. I felt that way.
Yeah,
you'd appreciate some of the stuff. You'd appreciate the socialist paradise that Wistful is. Yeah. And I don't think anyone else maybe other people have loved it. I don't know, but no one's mentioned it, right? I'm like, okay, this guy, I have a feeling from watching all your videos, I'm like, this guy will enjoy this. So like, I have to get this book.
I do very much appreciate that. And I'm like, it's great, but it's like, there's that weird thing between wanting to talk about books and the motivations behind it,
Yeah.
and selling books to other people.
Oh yeah.
You know what?
Oh yeah.
And the sad part is we still need to sell these books, because at the end of the day, yeah.
Well,
It's like I'm always interested in that, because I feel up to a point, with whether it's with music or with, publishing or whatever, if you're like on the producing side, whether you're an author or a band or a label or whatever, you don't want to actually have, let the numbers get out. There's
yeah.
this weird idea that you're like, sort of, whether it's you're bashful or with record sales, it's like physical record sales have, dwindled to like an absolute trickle, basically. And it's like, to get into like album charts in Germany, into like the top 100, even the top 50, you need to sell 1,000 copies the first week. That will get you there, because physical sales are so low. But people don't say that. They're like, this album has reached number 23 on the album charts, and they just like sold 2,000 copies, which I can tell you from personal experience is well, it's 10 boxes of CDs. I can tell you that. That's not a lot. And there's reasons why we do that, because so much of like how we do, so much of capitalism is performance, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm a best-selling author, and I wish I knew how much you actually need to sell to call yourself a New York Times best-selling author.
Oh,
in actual numbers.
Well, I know my numbers are, I have break-even numbers, and so I would need to sell, like, it's all relative to production value. So you can get pretty nice covers for very little money, but they're pretty okay. They look like you self-published your novel.
Yeah.
Right. And then audio, some people do audio themselves. You need a good setup for that, but that's a one-time cost. I don't feel I could do that.
Yeah.
So, it's not hard to find. Like, if you want a decent narrator, you're looking at between $100 and $300 per finished hour. So you can look at any audiobook and you can figure it out. I'm sure you can pay more, but you really can't pay much less.
Yeah.
So right away, you look at any book, you can see per finished hour means hour of the, what is Wistful Ascending, like a 13-hour audiobook? It was something like that.
13 hours is Wistful Ascending. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can figure out what it cost me.
Yeah.
You might have been able to look up my narrator's actual fee. I don't know if it's public or not, but
I didn't check, but yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, I'm just saying, like, anyone interested, you can. I'm telling you, you're looking at $100 to $300 per finished hour for quality narrator. So like that's a big barrier to entry for the audiobook, but for just the ebook, you can get by with a lot less.
Yeah.
If you have a friend who can proofread it for you, you get down to a handful of typos. You do your own like line and developmental editing. You can release a book for very little, but then I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the point. It's like you want to do it right.
Yeah. You want to do it right, it costs a lot more. I'd have to sell 4,000 books to really be, like, after taxes and everything, to really be breaking even. That's not going to happen. I don't think.
Yeah.
I'm willing to subsidize to some level, but I just can't subsidize all of it.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I think that's interesting, because like, we're talking international. You're selling 4,000 copies worldwide. That's not that much, really.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we tend to, like, in these communities, and that's like the danger of communities, is exactly that we tend to overestimate size and power or reach, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I'm very famous in a very tiny corner of the internet.
Exactly.
Like, everyone knows who I am on this one Discord server. But that's really not that many people,
Yeah.
Every single one of them bought the book.
Even out of those
100,
and even out of those 100 people, maybe 20 actually went and bought the book, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're a couple orders of magnitude away from that's you have I think I had this idea that I would put it on Amazon. A couple people would read it. They would tell their friends. They would tell their friends, and it would somehow turn into an avalanche of sales. That does not really. Most people don't, and I don't really blame people. Like,
No, of course not.
In my life, I don't know how many of my friends listen to me when I told them to read a book. Like I can say, oh, you should read Gideon the Ninth. Most of my friends aren't going to. I'm
I've
not
been I've,
creating sales,
I've been
or
telling
whatever.
people to read La Vitidor for like years, and there's
Yeah,
exactly two, now three people that have read it because I
yeah,
told them
yeah.
to.
Yeah, so this idea that this avalanche will happen on its own is not going to, does not work. It's better in some communities. I think if you're writing lit RPG or romance, you have a much easier shot.
Yeah,
Just a much bigger reading community of people who read a lot.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
if you want to make money, you definitely want to go into romance or lit RPG, and that's not a slight
I
to
have
them.
I have never understood lit RPG. I've just it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't get it.
Are you a big video game player? I assume not.
Now I stopped playing video games after Warcraft 3.
There you go. Yeah. I have not read much lit RPG. I've read some progression fantasy, which is like Cradle. Have you
Yeah, no Cradle.
I love Cradle in the most mac and cheese possible comfort food way. But what's funny about Cradle to me is it's taking all these ideas from these manga that I've read, or manhwa,
Yeah.
or whatever the Chinese word that I've read, translated and scanlated by fans, and it's just like comforting because it's taking all this stuff from there. And I think most people who read Cradle don't know the origins. They don't read the comics it's based on. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Okay, it's all original to you. That's fantastic. I mean, the author doesn't pretend he invented all these concepts, but
Yeah,
but yeah. So enough of my woes. I don't know, but
no, but so here's my point.
yeah,
You said it feels like whining, but I think sometimes it actually helps, because if you're just a consumer, if you're just a reader or a buyer of music, it's very, very difficult to actually notice or understand the realities, because no one ever talks about it, because no one wants to sound like whining.
yeah. And I certainly don't want anyone feeling sorry for me. I am not using the sales of these books to pay my mortgage. I have a day job. I hope everyone understands. You should not have pity for me. Joe needs money. I don't need. I'm good.
Yeah.
But if you read a book and I'll tell you the one thing that I think I wish all readers would hear and adhere to. If you read a book and you like it, go on Amazon and review it and pop out or at least a rating, and the same thing and do it on Goodreads, because there are algorithms where if someone comes across my book on Amazon and they see 35 ratings of whatever, they're like, well, that 35, that could be like his immediate friends and family. That doesn't really mean anything. If they could see 500 or 135, right?
Yeah.
That means something to the casual scanner, the casual, person just looking for a book to read. And that's a huge benefit. We're all desperate for reviews.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that, especially for the small indie press or like self-published authors, because those numbers, they really make a difference. Like 130 is a huge deal in that area, because we tend to overthink that's like, oh, he's probably sold 1,000 copies. Like, probably not. And 100 ratings make a difference. They actually do.
Yeah, even if I don't know if 1 stars help, but 3 stars will help. I'd rather a 3-star rating than no rating or review from someone. Although I prefer 5. And the ratings mean different things to different people. And as an author, you've got to sort of just accept that. I've had people love my book and they give it 4 stars, and I'm like, okay, it took me a hot minute to get past that.
I mean,
just totally, me, but
but I think, and that's why I brought it up, and I hope you're comfortable with that. But I think the idea is exactly that when it comes to the more DIY side of producing culture, whatever kind of culture that is, transparency actually helps, because we've built up this image of artists as these like otherworldly beings that do all this kind of stuff or whatever. And no one actually ever talks about numbers, because we're all afraid that that facade will crumble. And how are people ever to know? It's like I've organized concerts where people complain about the ticket price of $10, like 10 euros. And I'm like, there's like 3 bands playing here. One is from the US, one's from France, one is from like another part of Germany. How do you think that $10, or in this, I said like 10 euros in this, and they're basically the same at the moment. Like, how is $10 too much for that? Do you have
Yeah.
any idea how much actual like costs go into that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
And people don't realize that, you know, you may think that writing a story or writing a novel is easy because all you got to do is like sit down and type.
Yeah.
But even if you
Yeah.
can do that, and it's hard enough,
And,
all the other
yeah.
stuff takes time and money and effort and shit.
And so many with the ebook market and Amazon the way it is, so many books are given out for either free or like $1.99. And I don't blame any author for doing that. You ideally you could give your book away, you could move 1,000 copies or 2,000 copies. You're not making any money if you do that, right? If you sell 1,000 copies at $1 each, you bring home $300. I promise that's not paying for your cover and your editor, you know? And then, but then you're hoping that those 1,000 people will love it and buy book 2 for, you know, $6, and then you're, you know, or more, more than 1,000 people. But I think people look at those and like, oh, I can get all the ebooks I want for $1, you know.
Yeah, and I like, and that's, I think that's like the sad part is like, you're sitting here is like, I'm sitting here is like, I don't have enough money. I can't buy like 10 books for $15 per month. That's 150 euros.
Yeah. Yeah.
I might, that's 150 euros just for books. And a lot of people don't have that money. Yeah. So of course you're looking for the bargains and shit because and that's why we need stories that are set in like a socialist utopia because you know.
Well, you can always read my books on Kindle Unlimited if one has Kindle Unlimited. And and it's fun for me because with those, it actually tracks page counts.
Yeah.
So I can get a little report, and then every day I can refresh it 10 times a day and say, oh, someone just read 100 pages of book 2. I don't know who they are, but I get, you know, the number increments, and it's I know what they're up to. It's kind of this weird.
Well, I just listened to 80% of the audiobook today.
Oh, jeez. Nothing like a deadline, right?
Yeah, I kind of had all kinds of other stuff to deal with, and then I'm like, oh. Damn, I said Thursday. I better do this now.
I was not trying to pressure you.
No, of course not. But like, you know how it is. If I hadn't, I spent the entire day reading the history of anti-Semitism, and trust me, Wistful Ascending was way more fun.
That's a very low bar, but thank you.
It's a fascinating. So I'm reading this currently for this video project that I really want to talk about in the future, like anti-Semitic stereotypes and tropes in fantasy and science fiction. And so I went back and did some research, and now I'm reading this like very long academic Oxford University Press thing, and I'm all the way up to the early Enlightenment right now. Okay. So it's fascinating. Yeah. It's not fun though, because it's a dark topic.
No, that's why I want to use that in my marketing. I'm going to write an ad campaign, you know, like more fun than the history of anti-Semitism, you know, blue text, you know, make that my ads. Make a good radio spot, I think. Get people buying the books.
I'm not going to say better than, because better than the history of anti-Semitism.
I don't know what that would mean. Right?
Exactly.
Different goals, you know, very clearly different goals. Yeah.
No, but I'm and so like I did have a really good time with it, and I really appreciate the more aspirational positive side, and I think a lot of people will, you know, in general are looking for that, and more people are looking for that, because there's an ongoing idea of like escapism, and you know, people seek escapism for all kinds of reasons. But the more toxic dialogue in our world gets, and we don't even have to talk about about like the US midterms and stuff like that. It's if you're not like, things are very, very toxic out there, and if you're not a white cis het male at this point, you might want to sometimes, you know, read about places where things are better, and still have like exciting adventures there. And I think that's interesting thing. It's like it's not just all cozy and fun and games in, you know, the hybrid helix. It's still fun. There's still like excitement, there's still danger and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a place worth fighting for. And I think that's the part that I really appreciate about it, is like over time how you can see Rohan. And there's like very distinct like scenes where I felt like where Rohan realized that, you know, this place is worth fighting for. He's not going to, you know, go on, you know, when he has that conversation with Wiley about the whole thing. It's like, no. And you cleverly did that when he's looking at the mountain retreat and that he wanted to buy before. It's like, I noticed. And then he's like, and she's like, yeah, you can go and leave and, you know, live on a mountain retreat and raise sheep and goats or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, actually, this place is worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And for us, this might be a utopia, but for him, it's actually already a reality. But, you know,
yeah.
And I think that's important. I think that's what I like about like how it, for me, as someone who hasn't, you know, had a huge background in comic books, that's where it ties back to that old school classic, like where a lot of that comic book stuff came from, when it's like, yeah, these are heroes because they're fighting for a better world, or to preserve a great world. But for it to be a great place, it has to be a great place.
Yeah, and those early comics were Jews living in New York.
Yeah.
Living in this melting pot that was, for the most part, I mean, lots of problems, but generally speaking, a true, like, you know, I don't want to say paradise, but, you know, people were mostly get along.
Yeah.
And that's where I grew up. I grew up in New York City, and like, to me, in a way, I modeled Wistful after that also, in the sense of this, you can get all kinds of street food, like just go one vendor to the other, you know. I pulled a lot of that from Manhattan. You know?
Yeah. That's like an interesting question. Like, are comics quintessential Jewish?
I wouldn't go that far. I would need to do some research and come up with some evidence. But the early weren't most of the early, not all,
of course, like I think Stan Lee is Jewish. I'm not quite sure. Definitely, obviously, like the creators of Superman, definitely, of course. And as I said, like that's sort of where Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay kind of draws into that, exactly that essential like Jewish heritage of that.
Yeah.
And I think I think their staying power is exactly because it is about being a powerless group and having something aspirational that you look up to and go like, yeah, finally something.
Right.
And it may no longer, depending on where you are, it may not just, you know, that feeling is something that a lot of minorities have.
Yeah.
And it probably is, in a lot of ways today, it very much is more like the LGBTQ plus community. Yeah. Because they're very much under attack and on a global scale compared to other things. And yeah, I guess superheroes can still fulfill that if you play them straight. And I think that's like the strength of one of the strengths for me is like, this is not ironic. You know, it's like, don't get me wrong, I love irony. I'm a huge fan of irony, but sometimes you have to actually play things straight.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've written blog posts about, because I was trying to formulate like what it was about things like The Boys and Watchmen that dissatisfied me, or that left me wanting, and that was it. And that was the thing, is that they are not playing it straight, right? They're deliberately not playing it straight. The heroes are all, you know, crazy or bad or both,
and I think both with Watchmen and The Boys, there's a reason why those are British comics. There's a reason why those are like slightly older. You can't underestimate the amount of damage Margaret Thatcher did to culture and the world. that there's very much that. It's like, you goes back to stuff like, you know, Breaking the Law by Judas Priest. Like, where's all that golden future? It's like that.
Yeah.
The amount of like illusion, or like the amount of hopes that were dashed and broken
Yeah.
by Reagan and Thatcher,
Yeah.
and the effects that had on like art is
Yeah.
insane, in a lot of ways. And a lot of that darker, 2000 AD British comics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's where that found its way. That's where that
Right.
anger went.
Right.
But
Judge Dredd.
there's a lot of rightful anger in there. There's a lot
Sure.
of righteous anger in there, and I appreciate that righteous anger. But you also need the aspirational side. You need to have both things. You can evoke anger at the world, but you still need to direct it somewhere, and for that you need the aspirational side. And I think that's sort of what I see with on the sci-fi novel side with something like Wistful Ascending for me, in a way.
Yeah, that's why I didn't write a cyberpunk novel, right? Cyberpunk is, the corporations are ultimately winning, right?
Yeah,
I had not formulated this until you said it on Discord a few
yeah.
days ago or a week ago, and I was like, that is what annoys me about it, because I'm like, I don't want to write that. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I don't want to write that story. So
Although I
in
would
book
still.
two, they go to Earth, and
Mhm.
Earth has been, and I'm not really giving much away in terms of spoilers, but he has to go to Earth. And Earth has been largely transformed by alien technology. They basically
Yeah.
cured global warming, and the cultural and economic center of the planet is in the Sahara Desert, largely staffed by Africans. And
Mhm.
people are upset about it, but nobody who's running things cares. And I was like, I'm just going to write that because I can, and no one
Yeah,
can stop me.
yeah. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of power to that. Although I would still argue that, you know, William Gibson's first Sprawl trilogy is, at the end of the day, hopeful.
Is it? I have to reread some of that. It's been a while.
But it kind of ends with, you know, Bobby and Wintermute and everyone, breaking, into space to find these other intelligences that are inhabiting cyberspace and moving out and stuff. So there is a bit of a hope there, but the
Yeah.
overall idea is that humanity, and I think that's the really powerful thing there that cyberpunk does when it does it well, is that it's humanity against the system. It's all of us. It's not this culture against this culture.
Yeah.
And I think it's important because it is in the early 80s, right? It's like you spend like the 70s and the 60s with that whole like culture war between like or like political war, the Cold War thing between like, communism on the one hand and capitalism on the other hand. It's like, no, we've reached a point where that's basically done. But
Yeah.
all of us have to live with this planet. We've kind of fucked it up. So there's
Right.
something larger at stake. And when you look at the world right now, I think there's people out there who still haven't understood that part.
Right. Right.
But
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so I think there's powerful stuff in there, but
Yeah.
you need the positive side.
And
You need something
cozy
to aim for.
and cozies, which isn't exactly this, it's not exactly intersection with what you're talking about, because
Yeah,
cozies in general also have to have, low stakes
yeah.
and low pace, which is not exactly the same thing you're saying, but there's an overlap there. But
Mm,
cozies are doing very well right now, like in the recent round of Spiffbo.
yeah.
I forget how many, but a large number of
Mm,
the finalists or the semifinalists were cozies.
yeah.
I've read most of them. I'm so angry at having lost that I'm going to boycott all of those books for at least a couple more months to wrap my head around. I'm not really angry, but I'm sad. I'm sad.
And that kind of ties back, like there's a demand for that cozy to just like get
Yeah.
away from the
Well, Legends and
darkness.
Lattes didn't explode for no reason.
Exactly.
Right? People aren't desperate for coffee. And we have coffee, right? They're desperate for
Um,
something
I
very.
that's the one thing I did not connect with, is the love for coffee.
You're not a coffee drinker?
No, so I read Anne Lecky's Imperial Raj
Oh,
series, and that
no.
made me drink even more tea than I usually drink.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of tea.
I'm definitely on there for like love for hot drinks, but I'm a
Yeah,
tea
yeah.
drinker.
That's fair. That's fair. I love those books. I love those books. If you want to talk about inspiration for AIs, I
Yeah.
probably took more from Lecky or from Martha Wells' Murderbot.
I've never
which I
read the
love.
Murderbot books because too many people told me they're good, and I always get defensive when people tell me to read something.
I understand. I did love them though.
Yeah.
They're ridiculously expensive. They're all like novellas that the ebooks are like 15 bucks. I never,
Wow.
but I don't
Yeah.
like, but then I'm the schmuck paying 15 bucks for the ebook. So I can't really complain since clearly I'm the reason they're priced this high because
Yeah.
I'm willing to buy it. So they're terrific fun.
Yeah.
Um,
But
yeah,
yeah, and Lecky's the ancillary justice, ancillary sword, and ancillary
yeah,
whatever the third one is. They were really good books. I really enjoyed
yes,
those.
they were excellent. And there's a fourth, at least one more book in the same world.
Hmm.
This, I think it's disconnected, but
Yeah.
about and it's almost a cozy. It's this woman with this very small role to play solving her immediate problems. And I
Hmm.
can't remember the name of it, but it was really good.
I have to check that one out. But like having that third book be all about like the tea blockade, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm there for it.
Yeah, yeah,
I would get angry too.
yeah, yeah. I put a lot of food references in Wistful Ascending, probably fewer in later books, but I keep up some. I'm trying to think now. It's funny, and you get people who appreciate your book for like, oh, like someone is like, I love the kid. There's like a kid in this book, right? And he's
Yeah.
got a few good lines, right? But
Hmm.
I'm like, huh, I don't have any kids in books 2 or 3. Like, did I screw up? Is my audience really just after more of the kid, and I'm gonna like
I think
turn them all off? You
what I
can't put
really
everything in
appreciate
every
what I
book.
really appreciate about the kid is he feels like a real kid. Like I've known kids
I'm a
like that.
dad. I'm a dad.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
have kids.
And I think that's important because if I would sit down to write a kid character, it probably wouldn't work. I'm not a dad. I have very limited experience with kids, like small
Right,
kids. Some friends of
right.
kids, so I've met kids,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I could probably not capture that. And that's what I meant. It felt authentic. It's
Thank you.
like
Yeah, yeah.
this kid may have 10, antennae, but it still feels like a kid.
Yeah, yeah,
And like
yeah.
what I like about like the reference, and I think that's an important thing. There's um literature is a dialogue. It's an ongoing discussion. You're not writing those things on your own in the middle, in the void. Of course, you're responding to other books, and ideally other people will read your book and then respond to that. And so that's how it works. So referencing other art,
Yeah.
if it's referencing, nodding, tipping the hat, that kind of thing, that's how it works. No author has like ever written a book in a void. That's not how it works.
Yeah. And even if they say they're not reading their reviews, they're listening to a lot of feedback from their editor, their publisher. I mean,
Yeah,
somebody
yeah, of
is
course,
telling them things
of
that
course.
are
I mean,
influencing how they're doing
I, I mean that's why you do that, right? So you're writing, and I feel probably you're writing, but I assume it's like you're writing this stuff for a reason. You want this to be read. You want people to hear your story.
100%. Well, I'll tell you the thing I realized long after I started writing. So you understand fandom, right? When
Yeah,
you're a fan of something, you go out there and you can run into someone at like a convention and they're like, oh, you love Full Metal Alchemist? I love you're dressed in a Full Metal Alchemist costume. I love that manga. And your best friends instantly
yeah,
because of this shared appreciation for this property.
yeah,
And for me, it's even more direct and maybe intimate because I wrote the book that I would love.
yeah,
And I did not write this book because I thought it would sell, right? Every decision was, what do I want to write and read, right?
yeah,
That informed. So this is in a way my favorite book. I'm not saying exactly right because it's not, the quality's not there, but in terms of like the kind of book it is, this is my favorite thing. So anyone who reads it and loves it, we're best friends. I don't have to have met you. I don't have to actually know you. If you give my book, I've had people leave like a 5-star review, say, I love this, everything about this book on like Goodreads or something. I'm like, you're my best friend. I don't know who you are. Internet user number 7 or whatever it says on, I don't know what it says on Goodreads, but
yeah,
whatever it says, but we're best friends
yeah,
because you love this thing that I made because I loved it. And I almost feel bad for authors who write to market.
yeah,
When you write to market, it's not what you love. You're writing what you think someone else will love, which is great. And that's what you want to do. That's fantastic. You're making more money than me. but you're not having that connection because it's not really what you want to write.
Yeah, I mean,
It's not really your thing.
to be fair, if you're a younger author and you make that decision to actually, make this your job, your day job, then unfortunately you have to look after that stuff as well.
Yeah. I'm sure I sound disparaging when I say some of those things, and I don't mean to. Someone is writing to market, making their decisions based on, I know people who do this, and making decisions about how much editing they want to go through based on profit loss analysis. I have all the respect in the world for that. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
it's not what I'm doing. We're just doing different things.
Yeah.
But I'm also, again, I'm not trying to pay my mortgage with these books. I mean, it'd be great. I would love to, sell 1 million copies and quit my day job and be a full-time writer and never release book, 4 and just hang out with George R.R. Martin and
Patrick Rothfuss.
And we could grow our beards together, and drink. I think one of them, it doesn't matter if they drink, but I'll drink for all 3 of us if I have to. That's not win
the Santa Claus look-alike competitions.
Yeah, I had a pretty nice long beard. When COVID hit, I had this long stretch where I didn't get my hair cut and I did no grooming, and my wife objected at some point. My wife she said, you look like it doesn't look good. So she made me trim it to what I have now, which is not much. I can't pull it off anymore. I had long hair too, and again, my wife was like, "You're too old, and your hair is too thin on top for you to pull off the ponytail. It doesn't look right." I'm like, "Okay, sweetie, I know which side of my bed is buttered on." There's an unintentional.
And to be fair, we all need to have our self-image punctured from time to time.
That's why we get married, isn't it? Maybe not. Not the sole reason. Not the sole reason.
Possibly. But yeah. All right. We've been doing this for a long time. So once again, thank you very, very much for coming on. This has been pleasure. A lot of fun. Everyone, go and read those books. They're really fun. They got a lot of stuff in there. Jokes and action and superheroes and socialist utopia. Yeah. Once again,
thank you so much for having me, Raph. I really appreciate it. It was a blast talking to you.
Very much. We certainly have to do this again about other stuff.
I'd love to.
All right.
Sounds great.
Well, once again, thank you very much.